Cloud security compliance doesn't have to be complicated. Whether your business is migrating to the cloud or a seasoned cloud service provider, BAR Advisory can help you simplify security and compliance frameworks, including SOC, ISO, and HITRUST. As an extension of your team, BAR specialists will put your people first and empower them with the knowledge and tools needed to stay secure and compliant at every stage of your business growth. Learn how BAR can help your company build trust with consumers and become cyber resilient at securityweekly.com/BAR Advisory. That's BARR Advisory.
It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions often and will reach out to you once reviewed. Also, don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, gentlemen, time for leadership articles of the week. I love this first article. 5 questions CFOs should ask CISOs.
So I love the opening statement. Armed with the answers, the CFO can play an essential role in reducing cyber risk. Absolutely, 100%. Where I'm going to shift away and disagree a little bit is the first question that they put out there is the CFO asking the CISO, so are we secure? The question every CISO wants to hear, right?
Because the answer is, yeah, probably not.
It's
the right answer to that is
in time through my leadership roles. And, I had one CEO ask me that one day and I said, hold on a second. You and I need to have a meeting because we need to talk through this, right out of the gate. So are we secure? Gotta love it.
Look, I think the good thing is that the question is, the CFO having a discussion with the CISO. I think that's great, but I think it's, an honest understanding of what the risk tolerance is for the organization. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Doug, and then, how that aligns to, budget planning. It's not just how secure are we, it's what's our tolerance and how do we get there, right? How do we buy down the risk, and what's the alignment that we need to have as two leaders in the organization working at shared goals?
Well, 100%, Ben. And I joke and I laugh about it, but I took that opportunity to, sit down with the CEO and really talk through and educate the CEO, right? And you can do the same thing with the CFO. It's about identifying our key assets. It's about, reducing that risk and how resilient we are as an organization. It's talking about the current capabilities and what gaps we have, aligning to the desired goals and outcomes of the organization, like we talked about previously. Take this opportunity. If the CFO does start to ask you questions, take the opportunity to educate them and really build that relationship.
That's why I like questions 4 and 5 the best out of this list, by the way. Because the first one asks, what are the risks and potential costs of not implementing a cyber control or implementing a cyber control? It's not always the not, right? That goes back to the risk conversation we were having with Doug in the previous segment, right? This is about risks and understanding costs to mitigate risks, right? He talked a lot about risk appetites, et cetera. This is where I think a great conversation between the CFO and the CISO can happen. Like, if we do this, what's that? If we don't do this, what's the impact here? So that you can actually have that conversation and start to align costs to risks in some respects, right? So I like question 4.
And really sit down and negotiate the outcome, right? And talk about what that tolerance is, because the CISO could come to the table thinking that, we really need to remediate this. And once you start having the deeper conversation with the CFO, you realize it may not be as high of a risk as you thought it was.
But that's the core of it, right? Is that the discussion, not just with the CFO, but the rest of the C-level execs, but CFO is usually one of the more aligned and more strategic executives within the company, right behind the CEO, is if you want me to answer that question, I need to be a full participant in the rest of the conversations that are happening, because otherwise I don't have the context and I won't be able to give you an honest answer, right? Or the answer I give you will be misaligned to actually what the strategic goals of the organization are. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to be in those conversations. Otherwise, we don't understand what the risk tolerance is. We don't understand what the business is.
Yeah, exactly right. I like number 5 too. Do employees understand and implement the security protocols? The answer is no, in most cases. We know traditional security and awareness and training is not working. So it's a great question, because the response should be, yeah, if it's not, what should we be doing about it? How do we change the paradigm? See, I don't think enough people challenge the status quo when it comes to enabling the employees and the implementation of controls, right? That's why I'm at the Living Security now, because I think we can do that. But the CFO is the one that can enable some of those kind of status quo kind of areas and think about ways to actually improve security instead of just keep doing the same old thing over and over that we know doesn't work.
Yeah, the CFO can help influence in ways that maybe the CISO can't always influence, right? So having the CFO having your back is extremely important, and they can influence change.
Yeah, exactly right. Next article, how leaders can escape their echo chambers. God, this is so true.
I read this article. And I'm like, man, I've met so many leaders like this over the course of my career. If they only had this article.
I know, that's exactly right. And I sit here as a new leader walking into a brand new environment. How do I make sure I don't go into an echo chamber, right? So this was a good refresher for me, just to not even go there in the first place.
Yeah, it's funny. I read this and I'm like, this is every single, the list here of the things you should do. Every single one of those leaders that I worked with that were driven by ego did not do any of these well, right? So I guess the number one thing is, don't let your ego get in the way, right? Don't let your ego get in the way. Be candid, be humble, and really listen, right? Because it's not always about you. And when the ego takes control, it's always about you. So a lot of this is listen to other people, take their feedback. Don't consistently say no because you don't feel like they're aligned with you. Figure out a solution, figure out an outcome. I love the speak last. Let everybody get their ideas out. Let everybody, feel like they're part of the conversation and have a say in the conversation. And then the last one that I really liked was walk the talk. That's been my leadership style over the course of my entire career. I don't like to be the talky. I'd rather walk the walk and have other folks talk for me.
Yeah, for sure. This ties into the next article, which is around empathetic leadership, because you're going to see a crossover into some of the things, like be open to new perspectives, listen actively, show that you care, right? It ties into the previous article because this is exactly what I was trying to practice last week. I had 31 meetings in my orientation process in 5 days. I'm there to learn. I'm the new guy, right? I have some theories, but I want to hear it from them, and I want them to understand that I'm listening to them, right? And that I understand some of the challenges they're facing when I think about their career pathing. I also want that data dump on all the things from a company perspective that we've been doing, because that's how we're going to get better as a team, right? And so some of these articles I was actually practicing last week, trying to be a better empathetic leader and really learn from the team directly. And I think it's important, especially when you're doing a leadership change. These are very important tips and tricks to keep in mind as you're in those initial few days or weeks or months.
100%. And number 4, put yourself in their shoes. Switch your perspective a little bit. Look at it from their perspective. Really try to feel it, and then make some decisions. Because putting yourself in someone else's shoes will give you a whole new view of the world, because you don't know the pressures that they're feeling. You don't know some of the stress and anxiety that they may have as an employee within your organization, or the challenges they've had until you came on board. And being an empathetic leader, part of your job is to, get roadblocks out of the way, help them be successful. So you really have to listen and then put yourself in their shoes so that way you can help get those roadblocks out of the way.
I think
absolutely.
There are a lot of leaders who aren't necessarily empathetic, right? And that can be a negative thing. But I think for those leaders who don't necessarily gravitate towards these things, it's important to realize like you can figure this out, though, right? I mean, if you have self-awareness about that, you can try to lean into these behaviors and change or alter the path that you're on, right? You don't necessarily have to be the most touchy-feely person to still be empathetic with your team and be able to understand the perspective they're coming from, and not just your team, but the teams you're interacting with, right? Just I think it's super important to kind of take that on, and even if it's not something that you're naturally associated with, figure out how to get there, right? If you want to be successful.
Yeah, that's right, Ben. Article number 4, are bad office habits getting in the way of remote work? I'm going to rephrase this question. Is bad remote behavior getting in the way of office work? It was funny as we were having some conversations last week. We think about how professional we wanted to be in the office, and then we went home and we started to lapse in our remote work. Like we didn't care as much about lighting and some of these things that you get on a Zoom call and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't see you because you got this big window behind you. And we were just talking about like that, the gap, like we kind of regressed when we went to remote work. So as I saw this article, I'm like, I think it works both ways. Like
it totally does.
What are the bad office habits, and then what are the bad remote habits that impact in the office?
Oh my God, it's so funny. I was just having a similar conversation last week, and you have folks who come in, and I had this conversation with the love of the leader. And I'm like, wow, remote workforce really killed us to the point where people aren't even ironing their shirts anymore. Come on, people, you're in the office. Let's make sure we're ironing our clothes.
Well, yeah, I don't know whatever gave people the concept they could show up on a Zoom call in pajamas or, right. At the very worst, Jeffrey Toobin, right? I mean, there are things you just should realize how you have to interact with people in a virtual setting. And I think it's, I don't know. I agree with you, Matt, that it's kind of both ways. It's the bad office habits that are affecting remote, but the bad remote habits that are affecting, that office environment. We're trying to build a corporate culture. So it is definitely both ways.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we have to find ourselves when it comes to hybrid work, because that's where we live now. And that's where we're going to live, I think, forever, is in that hybrid work environment. We need to figure out that balance and, take advantage of the luxuries we have from working from home, but also bring that professionalism back into the office. But on the other side, part of the issues we were seeing with folks working at home all the time was they felt like they had to work more. They had to be more visible. They had to be online more. They had to respond faster, so we need to make sure that we're supporting folks in that on the remote side as well.
Yeah, for sure. I had the board meeting on Thursday, and I'm thinking, okay, what should I wear? So I take a long sleeve button down. It's 104 degrees. I even grabbed my sport coat. Now I didn't wear it because after I saw most people coming in, I'm like, okay, the sport coat's an overkill. But I'm still thinking that way. Like just because we've been hybrid for a while doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in a long sleeve button down sport coat at a board meeting kind of discussion, right? Like I really had to think about it because people aren't used to doing that. Like they just walk in with shorts and a t-shirt and think it's okay.
It's become the opposite. 3 years ago, if someone came in a polo shirt to a board meeting, we'd be looking at them funny. Now we're getting looked at funny for wearing a sport coat.
Right.
Yeah. I think that what are the norms is the question, right? And how do we assign what the norms are moving forward, right? So we kind of all understand that working environment. You have a meeting and people show up in shorts and sandals, and you're like, well, I don't know if really that was what we were going for in this meeting, right? I mean, but I actually don't expect people to show up in suits and ties either anymore. So we have to determine what that balance is, and I think we're working towards defining those norms.
Yeah, absolutely. Article number 5, 10 cybersecurity compliance statistics that show why you must up your cybersecurity game. If some of these don't scare the bejesus out of you, I don't know what's going to.
Yeah, I mean, the first one, that 93% of employees are overly confident about their cyber preparedness, that gave me a, what do you mean? that totally blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, where are they getting that confidence from?
Exactly.
That's my question.
Where is the confidence coming from, may I ask?
I thought 5, the increase in the GDPR fines was interesting. I mean, something I think we've probably seen coming, if you're honest about it. But I think that's going to grow, and that's going to become a big thing. People don't get on the stick with regard to GDPR and the evolving compliance areas.
Yeah, this one had a lot of medical device things, but more than 22 billion records were exposed last year. I mean, think about just the volume of data that's available. One of the things we're trying to figure out on our side is, you got all this data, like, can you identify potential risky behavior through some of this data? But 22 billion records, I mean, that's just a huge number. Like, it's kind of like mind-numbing of how much data is available through public breaches that's been exposed, and yet we've done nothing to really address it. Crazy.
So true.
Last article, culture wars in the battle to retain tech talent, morale matters. Absolutely. This ties a little bit into the remote work one, but I put it over here at the end. And it is about culture. It's about building the right culture and embracing the employees and bringing that. What I loved last week being down at Living Security was just the great culture they've created. I think it's so important for organizations to really think about like that fundamental culture you're going to create, because it creates a really great work environment. And when you're competing for talent, it does matter.
It matters tremendously. It matters as much as compensation, I feel, at this point. I've seen people decline jobs because the culture wasn't a fit, decline increases in salary. It's part of the whole package these days. Your culture is part of the entire package, and that's what's going to help you retain folks. People won't want to leave if you have a great culture, right? And you're keeping up to snuff with things like benefits and salaries and things of that nature. But it's a very, very important component. I'm seeing it, all the time these days.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are struggling with it too, because it's the culture is not just about, like you said, what benefits do you have? What's the vibe in the company? It's also like the people you work with, the interaction. So how, as a technologist, are we looking at ways to make that collaboration among teams actually give off a culture, give off a feeling of, belonging to the employees, where they enjoy going to work on some level, right? I mean, in the article it referenced, the water cooler culture, the ability to sit down and have a discussion with somebody that kind of, was a little bit removed from work. I think, we're on these Zoom calls and it's aligned. It's always work, right? And so how do we build up a culture, a feeling in the organization where it's about some type of community, right? Not friends, not family, but still a community where we feel a level of involvement and participation that draws us to want to stay there.
Yeah. And it's a lot of it is the why. What's that goal we're trying to achieve together? Our community, what are we trying to attain? And that's something that I think is extremely important to have within your culture, is what's the North Star of your organization? Why are people coming to work every single day? What's the mission?
Yeah, agreed.
And how to enable that culture in a hybrid remote environment. It was like I said, great being in the office last week, no doubt about it, because I miss being in an office and having the conversations and being able to sit down face to face. It's keeping that cultural momentum in a hybrid remote environment without needing to be in the office all the time, because people are coming in and out different days. And this will be one of the fun things to continue to stay on top of, is how do you continue that culture in a remote hybrid work environment? I think that's where organizations and maybe even technology we'll see some innovation, like how to make this even more culturally, relevant in these environments, because that's where I'm a little concerned, but we're going to work this out, so we'll figure it out as we go. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.